Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our scrubs because we're acting as business doctors. We are taking on the ultimate challenge, diagnosing a failing, loss-making enterprise and bringing it all the way back to sustainable profitability. We're going to look at exactly how winning companies restructure their portfolios, stabilize their operations, and drive sustained growth. Here is our roadmap for today's triage. First, we'll spot the symptoms of failure. Second, triaging and stabilizing the business. Third, diagnosing the root causes. Fourth, prescribing the treatment by restructuring the portfolio. And finally, rehab, or sustaining that profitability. All right, let's dive right into section 1, the symptoms of failure, recognizing those early warning signs. Most business failures, they don't just happen overnight. They creep up on you. One of the absolute biggest red flags of deep distress? A shrinking return on capital employed, or ROCE. Basically, this is just how much profit you're squeezing out of the cash you've already sunk into the business. To put that in perspective, a recent global study found ROCE actually dropped by a full 5% across the global manufacturing sector in just 5 years. When your capital is tied up and those returns are shrinking, well, the foundation is definitely cracking. Think of your daily operations like a giant pressure gauge. Operational stress, we're talking things like chronic labor turnover, constantly reacting to broken down machines, supply chain hiccups. It builds up quietly. At first, it kind of just looks like everyday business friction. But when you see your scrap rates spiking and your on-time deliveries dropping at the exact same time, oh boy, you're usually only 60 to 90 days away from a full-blown operational crisis. Which brings us to section 2, triage. It's time to stabilize the business. So, the crisis hits, and your immediate singular goal is survival. But here's a question for you to ponder. Why do so many of these turnaround efforts just completely crash and burn right out of the gate? When a shiny new CEO or a private equity firm swoops in to save the day and chase profitability, why do their efforts so often fall flat? Well, it's because they skip stabilization. Leadership gets way too eager and rushes to launch these massive, sweeping transformations before they actually secure their workforce and their cash flow. Look, launching a brand new, expensive software system when your machines are literally breaking down and attendance is totally unpredictable, that's just going to accelerate your failure, not fix it. To do triage right, you need ruthless focus. We're talking a daily scorecard. If your overall equipment effectiveness, which is basically how much of your manufacturing time is actually productive, is sitting below 65%, you are in crisis mode. If your scrap rate is hovering above 3%, you need active containment immediately. Listen, you don't need a fancy dashboard with 50 metrics right now. You just need to check these critical vitals every single day to stop the bleeding. And this intense focus translates into a really strict triage checklist. First, you absolutely must secure your labor supply. Next, freeze all non-critical change initiatives. Seriously, if it's not tied to keeping the lights on, put it on ice. You need to monitor your cash flow obsessively, contain any supplier defects, and instantly cut out all uncontrolled overtime. Only, and I mean only, when these things are stable can we figure out what's really making the patient sick. All right, on to section 3, diagnosis. Let's uncover those root causes. So the patient is finally stable. Now we have to look past those surface-level symptoms. And this is where the Pareto principle is an absolute lifesaver for business turnarounds. It reveals that 80% of your downtime and performance issues usually stem from just 20% of the causes. It's kind of like a cheat code. Instead of running around trying to fix 100 tiny complaints, this forces you to zero in on the absolute biggest bang for your buck. Once you spot that critical 20%, you use the 5 whys method to drill down. It's exactly what it sounds like. The machine stopped. Why? Well, the motor failed. Why? It overheated. Why? The cooling fan was completely blocked by debris. Why? Because, you guessed it, routine maintenance was missed. If you had just slapped a new motor in there, it would have totally failed again tomorrow. But by asking why 5 times, you hit the actual, actionable root cause. Now we're getting somewhere. Section 4, treatment. It's time to restructure the portfolio. With a rock-solid diagnosis in hand, it's time to write the prescription to get back to profit. True corporate restructuring is built on 4 main pillars. First, financial optimization, like renegotiating your debt just to get some breathing room. Second, operational efficiency, stripping out all that waste. Third is strategic realignment. And fourth, sometimes it's leadership replacement. Yep. If the old guard relies way too heavily on the old ways, bringing in fresh faces can instantly earn trust and credibility for your new strategy. A huge chunk of that strategic pillar is rationalizing your portfolio. But hold on, this doesn't mean just grabbing an axe and blindly hacking away at your products to cut costs. That usually just leaves the company weaker. Instead, it's about surgically reshaping what you offer. You really need to ask 4 hard questions. What should stay? What should go? What should grow? And what needs to shrink? You base this entirely on real market demand, commercial complexity, and your true core value proposition. But here is a crucial reminder. Throughout this whole intense treatment process, you absolutely must protect and cultivate your top talent. We've seen way too many turnarounds where the people were treated like an afterthought, just leaving HR to clean up the mess at the very end. That is a massively misguided economic choice. Your human capability and your intellectual capital, that is literally your absolute greatest source of long-term value creation, period. And finally, Section 5, Rehab. Sustaining the profitability. Okay, the business is out of intensive care, but the difference between a turnaround that sticks and one that fizzles out is super stark. Those heroic short-term fixes, they eventually fail. If your turnaround relies purely on intense leadership oversight and one-time actions, those old bad habits are going to creep right back in the second the pressure drops. To sustain that profit, you need disciplined daily management routines. You got to bake standard work, clear metrics, and problem solving right into the everyday DNA of the operations. To truly bulletproof your future, you need to establish what we call a pervasive cash culture. Working capital isn't just some bank overdraft facility, it's your actual cash physically tied up in your operations. By ruthlessly optimizing your accounts receivable, shrinking down that excess inventory, and smartly managing your payables, you unlock massive amounts of cash. And what do you do with it? You fund future innovations like automation and AI. This boosts your competitiveness, all without taking on a single dime of toxic debt. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If your company is out there struggling to find the resources to innovate, stabilize, or grow, I want you to seriously ask yourself, is the cash you need to save your business already trapped inside it, just waiting for the exact right turnaround strategy to set it free? Food for thought. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep learning and keep optimizing.